Imagine being part of a town that has been struggling under the shadow of something dark, an unseen force tormenting one of its own. And then, in a single breathtaking moment, a miracle takes place. The man who was once feared and avoided is freed. His mind is clear, his tormentors banished. It sounds like a cause for celebration, right? But instead of rejoicing, the townspeople do the unthinkable. They ask the very person responsible for this miracle to leave. Why would anyone reject Jesus after witnessing something so powerful? Was it fear? Was it anger? Or was it something more? Today we're diving into this fascinating story to explore what really happened in that Gentile town, the reasons behind the town's reaction, and what it reveals about human nature and spiritual priorities. But first, let's set the scene. Jesus had just crossed the Sea of Galilee, a region known for its diversity of beliefs and cultures. His journey across the water wasn't easy. The disciples faced a fierce storm that threatened to capsize their boat, leaving them frightened and uncertain. And just when all seemed lost, Jesus commanded the storm to calm. His power over nature itself left the disciples in awe, raising questions in their minds about who Jesus truly was. This event wasn't just a show of force. It was a glimpse into his divine authority and his mission to reach those beyond Israel. When they finally arrived in Decapolis, a Gentile region on the other side of the lake, the cultural divide would have been immediately apparent. This wasn't like the villages around Galilee, where people shared similar beliefs and traditions. Here, pigs roamed freely, something considered unclean by Jewish standards. The people here had their own way of life, their own customs, and likely viewed Jesus and his disciples with curiosity, maybe even suspicion. It was in this setting, on the edges of the Jewish world, that Jesus would encounter a man whose suffering went beyond any ordinary ailment. This man was possessed by not just one but a legion of demons. He lived among the tombs, isolated from society, his life a perpetual nightmare. And when he saw Jesus, the unthinkable happened. The demons within him, the very entities that had taken control of his life, recognized Jesus immediately. They called him Son of the Most High God. It was a chilling acknowledgement, a moment that underscored Jesus' authority not only over the natural world but also over the spiritual forces in opposition to him. But why did the demons fear him? And more intriguingly, why did they ask to be sent into a herd of pigs instead of facing banishment or destruction? This peculiar request was not random. It held a deeper significance that we'll explore further in this story. So, as we journey through this account, consider what it would have felt like to witness these events. Imagine the shock, the awe, and even the fear that would fill the hearts of those townspeople. And ask yourself, in their position, would you have reacted any differently? Picture the Sea of Galilee, calm and serene, yet capable of sudden and violent storms. Jesus and his disciples had just crossed this very sea, an unpredictable journey that tested their faith. In the midst of a fierce storm, with waves crashing against their small boat and fear gripping their hearts, Jesus did something that left them astounded. With a simple command, he calmed the storm, transforming chaos into peace. The disciples were left speechless, realizing they were in the presence of someone with authority over even the forces of nature. This wasn't just an ordinary teacher, it was someone with power they could barely understand. After this harrowing experience, they arrived on the shores of Decapolis, a region largely inhabited by Gentiles. This was foreign ground for Jesus and his followers, a place that felt unfamiliar and even unsettling to them. Unlike the Jewish regions where people followed similar traditions, Decapolis was a place with its own customs and beliefs. It was a territory where pigs roamed freely, an animal considered unclean in Jewish culture. This single detail speaks volumes about the cultural and religious divide that separated the people of Decapolis from Jesus and his disciples. Here, the familiar rules didn't apply. It was a place marked by a different way of life, one that the disciples might have viewed with a mix of curiosity and caution. In this setting, they weren't met with friendly faces or warm welcomes. Instead, they encountered a man who had become infamous in the region. This man, possessed by a multitude of demons, lived among the tombs, isolated from the rest of society. He was a figure of fear and sorrow, someone the locals had long since abandoned. Chains couldn't hold him and no one could restrain him. Day and night, he wandered among the graves, crying out and harming himself. His life was a nightmare of torment and isolation, a life utterly dominated by forces beyond his control. For years, the people of Decapolis had tried to subdue this man, but nothing worked. They had resigned themselves to his presence, viewing him as part of the dark landscape of their region. And then, on this day, Jesus arrived, stepping into a situation that the townspeople had come to see as hopeless, a situation no one expected to change. As Jesus stepped onto the shore, he and his disciples were immediately confronted by a sight that would have filled anyone with fear and compassion. From the tombs nearby, a figure emerged, wild and frantic. It was the man the townspeople had learned to avoid, the man possessed by an entire legion of demons. His appearance was haunting. He was disheveled, covered in scars, and his eyes reflected a torment that words could barely capture. This wasn't just a case of illness or instability. This man was bound by forces that had taken over his body and mind, forces that seemed to relish in his suffering. For years he had been in this state. People had tried to chain him, but no chain could hold him. He would break free, his strength fueled by the dark forces within. He was uncontrollable, unpredictable, a danger to himself and others. This man had been left to wander in isolation, driven to live among the tombs, cut off from family, community, and any semblance of peace. The people of Decapolis had no answers for his condition, and over time, they had simply accepted it as part of life. But for the man himself, every day was a battle, a life stripped of dignity and hope. As he approached Jesus, something extraordinary happened. The demons within him, the very beings responsible for his torment, recognized Jesus instantly. They knew who he was, addressing him with a title that revealed their fear and respect. They called him, Son of the Most High God. This title was more than a simple acknowledgement. It was an admission of Jesus' divine authority, a power that even these rebellious spirits could not ignore. In that moment, it became clear that the forces that had terrorized this man were now themselves terrified. The man, or rather the demons within him, fell before Jesus, pleading. But what they asked for was unexpected. They begged him not to send them out of the region. Instead, they requested something peculiar. They asked to be sent into a herd of pigs nearby. To us, this may seem strange, almost nonsensical, but this request held significant meaning. The demons, facing the reality of Jesus' authority, sought a way to avoid their own destruction. By entering the pigs, they were attempting to escape, trying to maintain their existence in a form that would spare them from immediate punishment. What did this plea represent? It was an acknowledgement of defeat, a recognition that they were in the presence of someone who held power over them. Jesus, the one who had calmed the storm just hours before, now stood before them as a judge with the authority to determine their fate. The scene was one of raw spiritual confrontation, a moment where the invisible battle between good and evil became visible, not just to the disciples but to anyone who would witness or hear of this event. This exchange was not merely about the man's liberation. It was a revelation of Jesus' authority over even the darkest forces. It was a reminder that no power, however intimidating or destructive, could stand against him. For the man, this was his first glimpse of hope in years, a sign that his suffering might finally end. For the disciples, it was another affirmation of who Jesus truly was. And for the townspeople who would hear of it, this encounter would challenge everything they thought they knew about power, authority, and the boundaries of their world. The demons, desperate and trapped, made a surprising request. They pleaded with Jesus, asking not to be sent away entirely, not to be cast into some unknown place. Instead, they sought permission to enter a herd of pigs nearby. To us, this might seem like an odd choice, but within the cultural and spiritual context, it held profound meaning. The pigs, considered unclean animals in Jewish culture, were symbolic of impurity. They represented something that was separate from God's people, something that held no place within the sacred practices of the Jewish faith. Yet here, in this Gentile region, pigs were raised openly, marking a clear distinction between the people of Decapolis and the cultural norms that Jesus and his disciples were accustomed to. The demons' request to enter these animals was not random. It was a calculated decision, a way for these spiritual forces to remain in the area without facing immediate destruction. By choosing the pigs, they sought a form of temporary refuge, a way to avoid judgment at least for the moment. Jesus granted their request, and the moment he did, the demons left the man and entered the herd of pigs. Immediately, chaos erupted. The entire herd, now possessed by the same dark forces that had once tormented the man, rushed toward the nearby cliffs. In a frenzied stampede, the pigs hurled themselves into the water below, drowning in the sea. It was a shocking and violent scene, one that left a deep impression on everyone who witnessed it. The drowning of the pigs held a symbolic weight that went beyond the immediate spectacle. In this single act, the destructive nature of evil was laid bare for all to see. The demons, having been driven from the man, sought refuge in the pigs, but even there, their presence brought only destruction. The self-destructive nature of evil was vividly displayed as the herd plunged to its death. It was as if, by entering these animals, the demons' chaotic nature became visible in a way that no one could ignore. This act was a powerful reminder that evil, by its very nature, brings about ruin, whether it's in the life of a person, a community, or even in the lives of animals. For the man who had been freed, this was a moment of profound relief. The forces that had once controlled him, that had isolated him from his family and society were gone. The proof of his freedom lay not only in his newfound peace but in the visible destruction of the herd. It was a testimony to the power of Jesus and the liberation he offered, a liberation that was not just spiritual but visible, tangible, and undeniable. For the disciples, this moment underscored the scope of Jesus' authority. They had seen him calm a storm, a feat that showcased his command over the natural world. Now they saw him assert control over the spiritual realm, casting out a legion of demons with a single decision. This event would have confirmed for them, more than ever, that Jesus was not only a teacher or prophet but someone who held a unique and unparalleled authority. For the townspeople who owned the pigs, however, this act was something else entirely. The herd of pigs was likely a significant part of their livelihood, a source of income and sustenance. Watching their herd rush to its destruction would have been not just shocking but financially devastating. In an instant, they saw their assets, their source of stability, plunge into the water, leaving them with an unexpected loss. This wasn't just an abstract spiritual event for them. It was an event with real economic consequences, one that would affect their daily lives. And as we'll see, this unexpected impact on their livelihood would shape their reaction to Jesus in ways that reveal as much about human nature as it does about the nature of spiritual power. Once the chaos had settled and the herd of pigs was gone, the people of the town came out to see what had happened. The news of the possessed man's transformation and the herd's strange destruction spread quickly, and a crowd soon gathered near the place where Jesus and his disciples were standing. What they saw was unlike anything they had expected. The man who had been a symbol of fear, who had lived among the tombs, was now sitting calmly at Jesus' feet, clothed and in his right mind. He was no longer the wild, tormented figure they had come to know. He was restored, peaceful, and fully himself again. For the townspeople, this sight was as unsettling as it was astonishing. They had grown accustomed to the idea that this man was beyond help, that he would live out his days in torment. To see him sitting there, fully sane and whole, challenged their understanding of what was possible. It was a powerful reminder that what had once seemed unchangeable could indeed be transformed. But this transformation, rather than bringing them joy, seemed to evoke fear. This fear was not just rooted in the miraculous nature of the man's healing. It was also tied to the loss of the pigs, an event that carried deep economic implications. The herd represented a significant investment, a source of income for many families. In an instant it was gone, leaving the community with a sudden, profound loss. The people's focus shifted quickly from the miracle to the practical implications. This loss made them question the presence of Jesus in their region, seeing him not only as a powerful spiritual figure but as someone whose presence could disrupt their lives in unexpected ways. Instead of celebrating the man's freedom or marveling at Jesus' power, the townspeople found themselves wrestling with a different question. What would Jesus' continued presence mean for them? If this one act of healing had resulted in such a drastic change to their economy, what else might happen if he stayed? The reality of this loss caused a shift in their perception of the miracle. It was no longer just a story of liberation. It was a story of potential upheaval, one that raised concerns about what other disruptions might follow. For the freed man, this was a moment of profound relief, yet he could sense the unease around him. The same people who had feared him now feared the very person who had freed him. It must have been a strange experience, realizing that his liberation came at a cost that his neighbors were not entirely willing to bear. His joy was met with suspicion, his peace with questions, and his freedom with a sense of loss from those around him. The man who had once been isolated by his torment was now faced with a new kind of isolation, as the people who had once known him saw him as a symbol of something unfamiliar and unsettling. For Jesus and his disciples, this reaction would have been revealing. It showed how deeply the townspeople were tied to their livelihood and how this attachment influenced their perception of the miracle. Instead of seeing the man's liberation as a sign of hope or transformation, they viewed it as a threat to their way of life. This encounter highlighted a common tension that Jesus often encountered in his ministry, the struggle between spiritual truth and material attachment. The townspeople's response to the miracle became a reflection of their priorities, showing that, for many, the cost of spiritual transformation was too high when weighed against their need for security and stability. This reaction left a lasting impression, illustrating the complex nature of human responses to divine intervention. Rather than welcoming Jesus as a healer or a savior, the townspeople saw him as a disruptor, someone whose presence could upend their lives in ways they couldn't control or predict. And faced with this unsettling possibility, they made a choice that revealed where their true concerns lay. As the townspeople processed what had just happened, the atmosphere grew tense. This was no ordinary event, and the impact of the miracle extended beyond the man who had been healed. Instead of celebrating, the people found themselves filled with a strange sense of fear and uncertainty. They saw before them a man who had once been uncontrollable and dangerous, now sitting peacefully at Jesus' feet. Yet, rather than drawing closer to Jesus, they felt an instinct to push him away. The miracle had forced them to confront a reality they weren't ready for. Jesus' power was undeniable, but that power had come at a tangible cost. The herd of pigs, a valuable part of their economy, had been destroyed in the process. For them, this miracle wasn't just a story of deliverance, it was a story of loss. And this loss was more than financial. It represented a challenge to the stability of their community, a disruption to the life they had carefully built. In their minds, the miracle and the economic loss were intertwined, and they couldn't separate one from the other. Faced with this new reality, the townspeople reached a collective decision. They approached Jesus not with gratitude or curiosity, but with a request for him to leave. Their response was an act of self-preservation, a way to shield themselves from the uncertainty his presence represented. The townspeople weren't hostile, but their fear was clear. Jesus had demonstrated a level of authority that they found unsettling, and rather than welcoming it, they chose to distance themselves from it. In their eyes, he was a disruptor, someone who could overturn their world in ways they couldn't control. This decision to reject Jesus speaks to a larger theme that runs throughout the Gospels: the tension between spiritual truth and material security. The people of Decapolis chose their economic stability over the possibility of spiritual transformation. They valued their livelihood, their pigs, over the presence of a man who had just demonstrated divine power. This choice may seem shocking, but it reflects a struggle that is deeply human. It's the same tension people face when asked to prioritize spiritual growth over material comfort, to embrace change over security. For the freed man, this rejection would have been a bittersweet moment. He had just experienced a miracle, a complete transformation of his life. He was no longer a prisoner to the forces that had controlled him. But now, as he looked around, he saw that his neighbors weren't sharing in his joy. They didn't see his freedom as a gift, they saw it as a threat. His transformation had come at a cost that they weren't willing to bear, and instead of welcoming the one who had saved him, they asked Jesus to leave. This moment illustrates how attachment to material things can obscure spiritual vision. The townspeople couldn't see the miracle for what it was. They couldn't recognize the depth of what had happened, because their focus was on what they had lost, not what they could gain. The healed man represented a new possibility, a life transformed by divine power. Yet the people of Decapolis turned away from that possibility, clinging instead to what they already knew, even if it meant missing out on something greater. Jesus, in response, didn't argue or try to convince them to let him stay. He respected their choice, even though it meant leaving behind a town that desperately needed healing. He didn't force his presence on those who weren't ready to accept it. This moment is a powerful example of how Jesus interacts with human freedom, allowing people to make their own choices, even when those choices lead them away from what could transform them. The townspeople's rejection of Jesus reveals the human tendency to resist change, especially when that change challenges the foundations of one's comfort and stability. As Jesus prepared to leave, the man who had been freed from the demons looked on, realizing that his life was forever changed. The townspeople may have chosen to cling to their old ways, but he had found something new, something that would stay with him, even if Jesus was no longer physically present. This event in Decapolis offers profound insights into the complexities of human nature and the challenges of spiritual transformation. On the surface, the story is about a miraculous healing, a man freed from the torment of demons. But beneath this layer lies a deeper message about priorities, values, and the choices people make when confronted with change. The people of Decapolis witnessed a miracle, yet instead of embracing it, they allowed their attachment to material wealth to overshadow the spiritual reality before them. The herd of pigs, representing economic stability, became the focal point for the townspeople. Their attachment to these animals reflects a human tendency to value immediate security over long-term spiritual growth. When faced with the possibility of transformation, they chose the comfort of the familiar over the unknown potential of spiritual renewal. This choice reveals a common struggle found throughout Scripture: the challenge of prioritizing spiritual values over material attachments. The townspeople's reaction highlights how difficult it can be to let go of what feels secure, even when that security limits the potential for deeper growth. This story also emphasizes the universality of Jesus' mission. Decapolis was a Gentile region, a place with different customs and beliefs, yet Jesus chose to cross the sea to enter this foreign land, and to bring healing to someone who had been cast out by his own community. This act reveals that Jesus' message and mission were not confined to one group or culture. His willingness to engage with people outside of the traditional Jewish communities illustrates the inclusive nature of his teachings. It is a reminder that the offer of transformation and liberation is extended to all, regardless of background or belief. For believers today, this encounter challenges them to examine their own priorities. Are there attachments, material or otherwise, that hold them back from experiencing deeper spiritual growth? The townspeople's response serves as a cautionary example, urging us to look beyond the surface of material security and to recognize the lasting value of spiritual transformation. It reminds us that true obstacles to spiritual progress often come not from external forces, but from within, from our own reluctance to let go of what feels familiar and safe. In the end, this story encourages a shift in focus, a call to place spiritual values above material concerns. It asks us to recognize that the true cost of transformation is not in what we lose, but in what we gain: a new perspective, a renewed sense of purpose, and a closer connection to the divine. This story from Decapolis is not only a reminder of Jesus' power over spiritual forces but also a profound commentary on human priorities. The people of Decapolis were offered a glimpse into something extraordinary, yet they chose to prioritize their material assets over a deeper connection with the divine. Their response challenges us to reflect on our own lives, to ask ourselves if there are things we hold on to that might be keeping us from experiencing true transformation. The healed man became a living testament to what Jesus could accomplish, a symbol of liberation and hope, even as his community turned away. His story reminds us that spiritual growth often requires letting go of what feels safe and familiar. It's an invitation to prioritize what truly matters, to look beyond material attachments, and to open ourselves to a transformation that goes beyond the surface. As we reflect on this encounter, let's remember that real change often comes with sacrifice, but that sacrifice is often the doorway to something much greater. May we have the courage to welcome it and to seek a life shaped by spiritual purpose over material security.